This is how we're improving online safety. The UK is passing some new legislation to make the internet safer for the younger generation. It's effectively a framework to protect internet users from scams, illegal content and anonymous abusers. It will force...
I'm here to present the Andrew Neil Show. I'm on the mic, so get with the flow. Top politicians here on C4. It's just half an hour, but they all want more. I ask all the questions like I just don't care. So come on, Boris, and get in the chair. Thanks, Nadine. Nailed it. For those of you who fell asleep reading the Grey Report into Partygate and have just woken up, let me remind you that even as we obsess about our own backyard, the war in Ukraine is still going on. The conflict is almost 100 days old. Thousands of soldiers and civilians dead, millions displaced. Kyiv and his environs are safe for now from Russian invasion, but a brutal war of attrition unfolds in the east. Putin is making some gains through sheer force of numbers and concentrated firepower. But slowly, the outgunned and outnumbered Ukrainians are resisting valiantly. The inevitable fair-weather friends in Paris, Berlin, and of course the New York Times are trying to nudge Ukraine's President Zelensky towards some kind of accommodation with the Kremlin invaders. Stouter hearts in the White House, Downing Street, Warsaw, and the Baltics are still rushing arms to Ukraine and saying it's up to Zelensky when he wants to sue for peace. The Kremlin aim now is to grab a big chunk of the East and call it victory. Zelensky is re-equipping his military with the latest Western weapons and mustering up to 1 million, yes, 1 million trained reservists over the summer. He wants an autumn push to force the Russians back and recoup lost ground, then negotiate from a position of strength. It's a tall order, but Ukraine has surely earned the right to try and to expect all democracies to support it. Good evening. Welcome to the Andrew Neil Show, another packed programme tonight. With me are Sonia Soda from The Observer and Sebastian Payne of the Financial Times. Money can't buy talent like that, so we pay them nothing. And I'll be talking to the rail union leader threatening a summer of strike action, Mick Lynch. Sonia, let me come to you first. If we are in for a prolonged confrontation in Ukraine, will the Western allies stick together or will they start to get divided?
Well, I think we're already starting to see some of those factious conversations happening, as you alluded to at the top of the show there, Andrew. And in some ways, I mean, some people might say it's inevitable and that it wasn't to be expected that this coalition that came together in a way that I think people weren't predicting. It looked very, very tight at the start, but that it was inevitable that as this conflict moved into weeks and then months, and I think the real risk is actually that we might still be sitting here talking about the war in Ukraine in a couple of years' time, that you were going to start to see these divisions open up. And I think it's really troubling, actually, because if you look at what President Zelensky is saying, Ukraine is still very much in need of artillery. They are having to make strategic withdrawals in the east from some parts of the east because of a lack of artillery. They're still asking the West for it. And I think that the UK has to do all it can to keep that coalition together. But it's going to be tough.
Well, time might be on Mr. Zelensky's side, because this summer that new weaponry from the West will be in Ukraine. His troops will be able to train, and you can't just use it overnight. And he's got this amazing, huge reserve army, which the Russians don't have. And they're running out of equipment. The danger is that it divides Europe. I mean, Britain and America seem pretty solid, so do the Baltics and Eastern Europe. But France and Germany are on one side, and Eastern Europe's on the other side. So the problem is it divides Europe.
And I think the thing that worries a lot of people in Whitehall would be the idea that Vladimir Putin will offer a peace deal, as you talked about at the top, to split off the East and to give away territory. And there'll be huge pressure from Paris and Berlin to accept that, because they've got this economic pain at home with the global inflation being driven high by the energy supplies and also the supply trade disruptions. So at this point, I think there's going to be a big push, as you said, Andrew, from London and Washington to make sure they don't give away land. And President Zelensky will not want that either. The polling suggests Ukrainians will not want to give away a single inch of land. So even if there was an offering from Russia for a deal, there's no potential he could actually even accept it. And I think that would be a very difficult test of the West's resolve that will, I think, almost certainly happen at some point later this year.
OK, thank you for that. Well, let's turn now to what might be a little industrial war of attrition in our own country this summer, and how much disruption, if there is disruption, will there be. I'm joined by Mick Lynch, boss of the RMT Transport Union. Welcome to the programme. Negotiations with management haven't broken down. In fact, I don't think they've even started. So why are you already planning to go on strike?
Well, we're in constant discussion with the management, very senior people across the industry, and we have been since the commencement of COVID, and it's clear that their plans are to cut thousands and thousands of jobs from the industry, from Network Rail through the train operators. Those plans are imminent, and our members have not had a pay deal in some cases for 3 anniversaries, and all those anniversaries are gone by now.
Right, but you're not in negotiations.
Well, I'm in discussions with them all of the time.
Yes, but that you are all the time. But you haven't started negotiations. They haven't put their proposals on the table, and you haven't put your counter proposals. Don't you have to do that before you even think of striking?
They've put their proposals on the table. They've told us in principle they're going to shut every ticket office in Britain. They've told us directly, face to face.
They've made no formal proposals to you.
They have 2,500 jobs in Network Rail maintenance, 1,500 jobs already gone.
Well, there was a lot of voluntary redundancy.
There were, but the jobs have gone.
And people left with about 30,000.
The pay deals have gone by. The anniversary dates have gone by, and our members haven't had a pay rise.
My point is that you're not in formal negotiation. You may be talking with them. They've yet to make a formal submission. And I guess what is, during the pandemic, the taxpayer poured £16 billion into passenger services to keep them alive. It amounted to £600 for every household in the land to keep the passenger rail service intact during the pandemic. And their reward is for you to make life miserable for them?
Well, our reward is 0 wages. Our members worked all the way through that. They were not furloughed. They were not allowed to work from home.
Loss of pay.
Because there was no loss of pay because they did all their work. The companies made profit all through furlough, and what the government did was load up these companies with profit. £500 million out of that £16 billion was given in profit. The companies, the chief execs, are still raking in millions of pounds a year in wages, and the people that are telling us to rein in our belts are the people who are raking in profits from the industry.
It just seems ungrateful. I mean, it amounted to £160,000 per rail worker to keep the passenger service.
Well, if only my members got that £160,000.
No, of course they didn't get it. It was to keep the service going.
They get a pretty
good whack as it is.
No, they don't.
But there was not one lost job. Not one was even furloughed. So there was no loss of basic pay.
Well, you wouldn't be furloughed if you were doing your job, would you?
You
only get furloughed when you're not doing your job.
There wasn't that much to do because there were so few people travelling on the trains.
The services ran on a timetable.
Intact. And unlike many rail commuters who did have their pay cut, and now they face a further pay cut because they can't go to work. As I say, it just seems unfair.
It seems unfair that the reward for our people who were described as Grant Shapps, their minister, as heroes, are now being reduced to zeros. They're getting nothing in pay, and they're being told that thousands of them are going to lose their job. They're also being told that their conditions that we've negotiated with those companies are going to be ripped up, and that their work-life balance will be disrupted, and that their whole lifestyle will be changed by these cuts. And they're not prepared to accept it. Working-class people in this country need a pay rise. That's one of the best answers to the cost of living crisis. And the fact is that the companies and the government are trying to suppress wages and trying to rip up people's conditions to make them precarious and vulnerable so that they can maximise their profits.
Rail passengers are still back to only 75% of pre-pandemic levels. In some commuter lines, it's only 60%. People are still working from home. The rail system has a £2 billion funding gap. This is a strange time to drive away even more passengers.
Well, the funding gap is being created by them cutting the funding. While they're cutting the funding, they're cutting jobs. And
they put 16 billion into the system.
They put billions into the system every year, Andrew. Since privatisation, they've taken out more than £10 billion in profit, which could have been reinvested in the services. So the funding cut is a deliberate attempt to cut back on rail workers' jobs and to cut back on railway workers' conditions, which is going to be mirrored all over the public service in this country. And I think workers are reaching a position where they've had enough of it. They need a pay rise. They need job security.
The average pay for a driver is £54,000?
It could be, but we're not representing drivers on their own here.
No, but you do represent
We're
drivers.
representing many people who are low paid, people whose salaries are in the 20,000s, maybe early 30,000s.
But you're not just going on strike for them. You're going for on strike for those who earn 54,000 on average. Some are up to 80,000. That's for a 4-day week. They get 6 to 8 weeks annual leave. They get free or subsidised travel. They retire at 62.
They can retire at 62.
They can retire if they want at 62 for around a pension of £40,000 a year. It's not bad.
Well, that's
I'm not against any of that.
That's the power of organised trade unionism.
But it's not a reason for going on strike.
Well, we're not going on strike over that. We're going on strike because of job cuts, because everybody in this industry has not had a pay rise, including those low-paid workers who earn between 20 and 30,000, which is the majority of people. People like yourself are obsessed by train drivers' wages, but don't seem to be interested in cleaners' wages, caterers' wages, and people dispatching the trains.
No, but if you were to say, look, we want to confine these negotiations to giving a proper boost to those on low pay in your union, the drivers are actually doing okay at the moment. We want those who are on low pay and have suffered. That would be a different matter, but you're not saying that.
You've just identified the RMT standing policy, which is in all our pay claims, that the lowest paid in the industry should get the highest paid.
But you're still going for pay rises for those who can earn up to 80,000.
Well, we'll negotiate the package across the companies, but in all of that...
You're not negotiating.
But we will be negotiating.
When?
I'll be talking to them on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday.
Are these formal negotiations?
These are discussions ahead of negotiations.
So they're not formal negotiations?
They're discussions ahead
So
of
why,
negotiations.
again, are you talking about strikes?
Because we haven't got a pay deal for the last 3 years, Andrew.
Well, lots of people haven't had
told
pay deals for a couple of years. At least all your members kept their jobs. They kept their jobs and they weren't even furloughed. So your members have done better than a lot of people.
We do better than some people because most people haven't got a strong trade union in this country, and it leads to super exploitation because they haven't got anyone to defend them. And what workers need is an organisation of unions that will stand up for the working class.
You say that these strikes will, quote, bring the country to a standstill. Maybe you're overestimating your ability to do that now. Most people are still working from home several days a week. So that's why rail commuting is down 40% compared to pre-pandemic. If people are already doing a couple of days a week from home and you bring disruption to the commuter lines, they'll just work from home for 5 days a week. You won't do the disruption.
Well, our aim is to get a settlement. We don't want to disrupt anyone. We want the services to run and we want a square deal from the companies.
But you're already going on strike because, I mean, Transport for London, 4,000 underground station staff, scheduled overtime ban from June the 3rd and a strike from June the 6th. Is that's going to happen?
Well, yes, that will happen unless there's a settlement.
These are your members?
Yes.
So you are going on strike?
Well, that's a strike, a separate strike, about 600 job cuts.
That's only a couple of days ago. How can you get a settlement in a couple of days if you haven't even started negotiating?
That issue's been discussed for nearly a year so far. Since
not on formal negotiations.
Well, that is informal negotiations, that one.
But maybe you won't have the power that you once had. And I reckon you have
we'll have to find out, won't we?
And you've put that power to good use in the sense of you've got fantastic conditions for a lot of your members. Recognise that. And those who believe in a high-wage economy should welcome that. Why object to a driver getting 54,000? I certainly wouldn't object to that. But maybe now this is going to be different. Maybe working from home has changed everything, and that the power that you have had in the past might not turn out to be the power you have now.
Well, we'll have to see as we go forward.
Well, what do you think?
I'm sure that our members will support the call. That means that they will support the call in Network Rail from all over the GB And if they are forced to go on strike, that will mean halting of railway services. We will have to see what the effects of that are on the economy. But we're not in this game to attack people's working lives and disrupt the economy. This is a defensive dispute. They have put their tanks on our lawn and said, we're going to cut thousands of your jobs and your pay will be indefinitely frozen.
And your threat, your response was immediately to threaten strike action.
Not immediately. I've been discussing this for 2 years.
Excuse me, I think June the 3rd is quite immediate.
But I've been discussing this since St Patrick's Day last year, when Grant Shapps instructed the companies to take this line. And he's been waiting to the time of normalisation, where he doesn't need our cooperation on the COVID measures, to bring this dispute forward. And this is being put together by Grant Shapps and the Treasury. It's a direct instruction through these companies.
It might be that we're at a watershed now. 94% of rail commuters are now doing some working from home, 1, 2, sometimes 3 days a week. Only 6% are now doing 5 days a week, the way they all used to. This could be a watershed in which the level of the rail system we have is no longer required.
Well, we need a rail system that's part of a comprehensive and coherent transport policy because we need to get rid of congestion. We need a non-carbon economy, and the railway is an essential element of that. We want to see a properly funded railway. We want this government to take the track that other countries in Europe have done, which is actually to lower fares and make it completely accessible to all kinds of users, not just business travellers and commuters, but everybody should be using the railway and all of our public transport services.
Do you have a figure in mind of what you want the pay rise to be?
Well, we've got several anniversary rates. Inflation at the time that most of these deals should have been done was around 7%, but we've also got 2 years of missed pay deals. So we need to get a package together that gives some value. And there are a number of options that we can discuss with the companies, but we're being told that pay is going to be frozen down to a level that does not reflect rising inflation.
Well, it certainly won't reflect rising inflation, but it's not frozen. That's not what the government
It's been frozen for 2 years.
No, you keep on saying that, but these were a difficult 2 years for the country, and at least all your members kept their jobs.
Well, the MPs all got a pay rise during that period, as did...
What, you want me to defend the MPs? I think you've come to the wrong studio.
Well, yeah, but the MPs are the ones that are telling us that we must have this austerity.
You say, I think, that you don't want a strike. The government says it doesn't want a strike. The commuters certainly don't want a strike. So can't you commit tonight, instead of making these strike threats, to no strike action until negotiations have been exhausted?
Well, negotiations are exhausted in the sense that they've made it clear what they want. They've got the chance now to come down off the positions they've taken, which is to strip out every single condition that our members have the benefit of. They also have said that they want to get rid of thousands of our people. One of the first elements of this is that we have a no compulsory redundancies deal while we're having those discussions. That will make the modernisation discussions more comfortable for everyone, but they won't commit to that as a first step.
Well, you need to meet them first to be sure.
I meet them all of the time, Andrew, you can be sure of that.
Right. Mick Lynch, thank you for being with us tonight. After the break, we're going to talk about that and more with Sonia and Seb. Welcome back. Seb and Sonia are still with me. Seb, is this going to be just another normal industrial dispute? We have plenty of strikes in the transport system. Or is this going to be different? Is this going to be one in which the stakes are high for both sides, that the government will be humiliated if it loses, and if the union loses, it will be almost broken?
It feels like it's a bit of a battle to the death here that Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, has talked about bringing in legislation to guarantee minimum service, and the RMT have said that if they do that, it would undermine their ability to strike within the future. Now, the government hasn't said they're going to bring in that legislation. They've threatened to do it. And obviously, I think there may be a bit of grandstanding going on from both sides here to try and make some headlines and push forward their cause. But I think if they did go for taking out Network Rail's signallers, that would be an existential problem for the railways.
Signallers are coming out. Sonia, is it just another industrial dispute, or is it an almighty clash that in a way neither side can afford to lose?
I think it has the potential to turn into an almighty clash. And I think when you take a step back, it's really at the heart of two big conundrums we're facing. There's first of all the cost of living crisis. And I do feel for low-paid staff in stations who haven't had a pay rise for 2-3 years and are now facing inflation of 10%. The other big thing, which you touched on in your interview, is the pandemic and the way that the pandemic has changed the way we all work, plus the fact that technology means you need fewer staff in stations and on trains. So that's just really difficult because actually we need to run our railways more efficiently because less people are using them and technology enables us to do that. But then you've got people who've worked in the railways all their lives facing compulsory redundancy. So
there haven't been any compulsory redundancies
Not yet, but
I mean, Network Rail may want to go for that.
Yes. It sounds
I would have thought
like
that could be the matter for negotiation.
Well, absolutely.
If we ever get
I think the
around to
point
it.
you made was fair, which was, formal negotiations haven't started yet. And, you want strikes to be an absolute last resort. I agree with Seb, I think, that some of this is both sides grandstanding, both Grant Shapps and the unions, on the run-up into these formal negotiations. But I do think these are very fundamental, tricky things to manage,
indeed.
actually, as a
Seb?
society.
I think one of the things, though, is if you look at the modernisation objections the RMT have in the past, they had this big argument about ticket stations at tubes, saying this would be a big problem to safety and what have you. The fact is, they're simply not used by that many people anymore. We've had, as you said, Andrew, £16 billion have gone to the railways. The way we use them has changed. And I think they do have to be modernised, and viewers will look at that and think, well, that doesn't seem unreasonable given how everything has changed over the past 2 years. And if you kept all these ticket stations open, how is that good for the railways? It's just pointless money going to a place where it could be much allocated elsewhere.
If it is an almighty clash, I wonder if this government knows how to fight a big industrial dispute. I mean, it's a cabinet full of people who've... This is all ancient history. They've never had to do this before.
Yeah, that's true. And I think it's also...
Whereas Mick Lynch, he knows how to do it.
Absolutely.
He's a master at it.
And I think the danger is that you see this ramp up in a way. So, there's lots of chat at the moment, well, if it's just the odd strike here or there, it's not going to affect supply lines, supply chains, people will just work from home a bit more. It's not going to cause that much disruption. I think the danger is if it really ramps up and you have train companies saying, well, we're just not going to run trains for days at a time, and that starts to affect freight and that starts to affect supply chains. And then I think that really starts to apply pressure on the government.
Yeah, if you can't get food and mail going around the country, and of course one criticism of what the RMT are proposing is that ordinary workers who are already struggling to get around will struggle even more, then that could have a big backlash for the unions.
Well, we shall see. It's going to unfold. Certainly once this week's events are over. Thank you both, Sonia and Seb. Then, just before we go, the week ahead. It's Jubilee week, of course, so colours will be trooped, givings will be thanks, and we're even getting a special visit from Harry and Meghan. And if that wasn't enough, Cliff Richard. I think it's time for that mini break in Mongolia. That's it for us this week. I think we got away with it, as someone in Downing Street said recently. Next week, we're on at the earlier time of 5:15 with no more rap. That's a promise. It's a promise. Bye-bye.